Tonight on The Wrap, the Prime Minister calls for tougher action against controversial chants at pro-Palestine protests to help tackle a rise in anti-Semitism. Kemi Badenoch is calling for an outright ban on the marches, saying Keir Starmer isn't doing enough in the wake of the Golders Green terror attack. Also tonight, NATO says it's confident in its defences, despite Donald Trump pulling 5,000 troops out of Germany following a spat with Chancellor Merz. Difficult questions about Britain's colonial past hang over the King's visit to Bermuda.
They stripped us from our names, they stripped us from our language, but they couldn't strip us from our culture.
Celebrations for the Tractor Boys. Ipswich Town secure immediate return to the Premier League. We discuss the day's biggest stories with Nancy Fielder and Nathaniel Ogoni. Plus, a first look at the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers, including a piece from the Prime Minister in The Observer calling for unity in the Labour Party. Good evening, Nancy and Nathaniel. Welcome to you both. Well, tonight, a debate over how far to go in restricting pro-Palestine marches in order to help protect British Jews. The Prime Minister has suggested some protests could be stopped and called for tougher action against controversial chants. His comments come in the wake of the Golders Green terror attack, with authorities warning of a troubling rise in anti-Semitic incidents. The Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, criticised Keir Starmer for not going far enough and said the marches should be banned. Do you agree with that, Nancy, or not?
No, I don't think there's any evidence to show that banning marches would make things better, but we obviously need to do more to protect Jews.
Nathaniel?
Yeah, I think it's about a wholesale approach to security. It's not about banning a march today or banning a slogan tomorrow. We just need to tackle it as a whole.
Well, Sky's Tom Cheshire has been speaking to protesters in South London today about why they continue to use chants seen by some as anti-Semitic.
Almost every weekend, it's easy to find a pro-Palestine march, even if it's a smaller one, like this in Lewisham, south-east London. Some hold these marches responsible for the troubling rise in anti-Semitic attacks and abuse. And the Prime Minister has said marches could be restricted.
When you hear some of those chants, globalise the Intifada would be the one that I would pick out, then clearly there should be tougher action in relation to that. Many people in the Jewish community have said to me, it's the repeat nature, it's the cumulative effect. Now, I accept that, which is why we intend to deal with cumulative effects.
I think it is time to ban these marches. They are trying to let people know that there is support for harming Jews. We need to make sure that that is stopped completely. Otherwise, we're going to continue seeing horrific events like we saw in Golders Green this week.
Some here understand that call for restraint.
It's horrible to think that any community anywhere is living in fear, and if a small reduction would help that community to feel more settled, there may be a place for it.
It would be good if, the Jewish community were also trying to bridge gaps between themselves, Muslims, Palestinians, and also what the Israel state has been doing over this time. There's been no open criticism or any action against the Lebanese April the 8th action.
I think there's been plenty of criticism, and also the other side of it is asking a lot of the Jewish community, which has faced these attacks, which has seen people killed, in Manchester. To ask them they have to do the work is a bit unfair, no?
I don't think so. I think it's the work of both sides.
It's not long after the march begins that the familiar, controversial chant rings out.
From the river to the sea, a lot of people...
The man with the microphone didn't want to talk, he was busy.
I've heard chanting from the river to the sea. A lot of people say that is an anti-Semitic slogan.
Well, they say it is, but they know it's about everybody who lives in that region living under democracy without any kind of apartheid regime or anything like that.
Other people interpret it as wiping the Jewish state of Israel off the map.
I don't see why there's any need for anything like that, why you would actually interpret it that way.
So this is obviously a small-scale protest, but What Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, is talking about is the cumulative effect of having march after march on the pro-Palestinian cause.
There have been 34 national-scale demonstrations since October the 7th, 2023. Their organisers reject claims that marches lead to anti-Semitism.
Our stewards, when they see inappropriate slogans, intervene and ask people, we don't have the force of law, ask people not to use them, and by and large, they comply. So we have to be absolutely clear here. There is no threat whatsoever to the Jewish community from these marches. In fact, they are attended by thousands of Jewish people.
Many who are part of that community disagree.
I think most people would accept that the sheer frequency of these pro-Palestine marches, the intimidation that is effected on the small Jewish community, and other factors such as the arrests and the state of our society now for Jewish people, all cause a reasonable judgment to be made that these marches should be stopped.
They won't stop here in southeast London or on streets up and down the country unless the government intervenes and decides the balance between freedom of speech and the safety of British Jews. Tom Cheshire, Sky News, Lewisham.
So, Nancy, do you think that that is the balance between people expressing their freedom of speech and keeping Jewish people safe, or at least allowing them to perceive that they are safe?
I think a lot about is about the perception. In Sheffield, we have, just like most places, we have regular pro-Palestine protests, and actually a lot of people who protest are Jewish. This is not we hate Jews, this is not anti-Semitism, this is disagreeing with what the Israeli state is doing to children, to people in Palestine, which is killing them in huge numbers. It's a different thing, but if Jewish people in England aren't feeling safe, then something needs to be done. I don't think stopping people protesting about their beliefs when they're not necessarily anti-Jewish is the right way to go about it.
But do you understand how some Jewish people do feel threatened, especially when, you know, we have the chants like globalise Intifada and from the river to the sea?
Absolutely, but I do think that is a minority, and I think there's ways to tackle that. I think a mass ban on protests is absolutely not the right way, and it's not how we've dealt with problems in the past. I think there's perhaps 2 protests that have ever been banned in this country. I don't know why we would start now. Let's take proper action that will actually protect Jews, because this won't.
Nathaniel, Kemi Badenoch is calling for these marches to be banned outright. I think she, along with other people, have described them not as peace protests but as hate.
These marches, I think the idea behind a ban is safety and security, but these bans aren't the only threats that we face in terms of safety and security. So I don't think it's just about these marches. I don't think it's about banning a march today or banning a slogan tomorrow. I think there are a wide range of threats our security faces. I know MPs were looking at threats from the grey zone recently, whether that's state-sponsored terrorism and other things like that. So we need a sort of wholesale, holistic look at these things, not just like, you know, banning a march today or a slogan.
Nancy, the government's independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, Jonathan Hall, KC, is calling for a moratorium on these marches, saying that it's impossible for them not to incubate anti-Semitism.
Where does it stop, though? So we ban this, it doesn't necessarily make anybody any safer, and what's the next protest to be banned? I mean, it's very different circumstances, but this Prime Minister has only very recently ordered an inquiry into the Orgreave protest when the miners were striking, when men were arrested for doing nothing and threatened with life imprisonment because they were labelled as rioters. The protests are really important, and what we need to do is get it right so that we're protecting people from how they feel, from how they are been made safe. They're clearly not safe. We're seeing attack after attack. I just don't believe that stopping protests is the way to do it. I think there must be better ways. And I just think it's a really slippery slope. If we're not allowed to say certain things, if we're not allowed to protest in mass numbers, where's the freedom?
But if the Jewish community is saying we would feel safer, we would feel that we could go into central London at the weekend, we would feel much more comfortable being openly Jewish, as it has been described. If these marches were banned, shouldn't we then listen to them?
When do we... we need to listen to them, but I think we need to listen to everybody involved. And you're absolutely right. If things have been said during protests that are making people feel uncomfortable, but do we actually ban protests against decisions that have been taken in other parts of the world that we really strongly disagree with? Do we ban what the Israeli opinion on the Israeli state? Is that the same thing?
And that's the crux of it, isn't it? That a lot of people conflate what the Israeli state is doing and hold Jewish people in this country or wherever responsible for a government that they might not even necessarily agree with.
That's right.
Yeah.
You do have to separate the Jewish state, so you do have to separate Israel from the average Jewish person.
Yes.
There are lots of Jewish people who agree, there are lots of Jewish people who disagree with what the Israeli government is doing. So I don't think we should sort of conflate the two. But you talked a bit there about Jonathan Hall, the government's reviewer. I know he's talking to MPs in Parliament as soon as they return. They're doing, as a priority, an investigation into rising anti-Semitism in this country. They're talking to him, they're talking to the Community Security Trust, who do a lot of work in terms of keeping Jewish people safe. And I think the Home Secretary, who makes the final decision on this kind of matter, has a really tough decision. Because on one side, you do have a general right to protest, and you want to protect that right and that freedom, but you also want to keep people feeling safe in this country. And so there's a sort of very difficult balance between the two.
Nancy, the Prime Minister is suggesting that he would support prosecution of people using some of the hateful chants that we've described. Would you agree with that?
I think if things are proven to be hateful and that they are targeted in a way that is deliberately a hate crime, then absolutely. But I think we really need to be careful about it. And I think, actually, time will be better spent on protecting the communities that aren't feeling safe. And I think this is it's a very public thing that could be done. I don't think it would actually make anybody safer at all.
It's not just, you talk about protecting the communities, it's not just about throwing money at the situation, which is something that Sir Keir Starmer has suggested. There will be increased money put into security for the Jewish community. But what else needs to be done? Because it's a culture that's breeding anti-Semitism, and which a lot of people are saying the marches, as we heard there, that quote, are incubating anti-Semitism. So does it not then stand to reason that you ban the marches?
Well, I think there's a lot of other things going on. There's a lot of casual anti-Semitism, which is very serious, but there's a lot of what people call casual anti-Semitism on the rise. So you see that a lot with young people, particularly young people who actually hold themselves to be generally socially progressive, people who think that they are... Yeah, people who hold themselves to be socially progressive, who hold themselves to have anti-racist views, but seem to treat Jewish people differently. So if you ask them, would you hold these views about a black or an Asian person, they'd give you a very different answer. But for some reason, with a lot of these young people, you do have them treating Jewish people separately. You have a lot of this in educational establishments, which is why I say it's an education piece. The Union of Jewish Students did a report on this a while back. A fifth of university students wouldn't want to live with a Jewish housemate. Half of them have heard slant chants about globalizing the Intifada or talking about Hamas and Hezbollah in a positive way. So we see a lot of this casual anti-Semitism amongst young people. I think we really have to educate them to remind them that this kind of disgusting behaviour just can't go on.
We live in a very divided society, and you are right about what you're saying, but this is also a wider issue. There is absolutely awful things said about Muslims every day. What we need to do is build bridges between communities. We need to stop the division. The politics of today is deliberately dividing people internationally, but also nationally and also locally. And it's going to come up at the local elections. And we are at a really, really difficult time where people are turning against each other and hating each other. I just don't think banning protests is going to make that better for any group.
OK. Let's move on to the international stage now. And NATO says it's seeking clarification from the United States over a decision to withdraw 5,000 US troops from Germany. The move comes after Donald Trump criticised the German Chancellor for saying the US had been humiliated in its war with Iran. NATO says it remains confident in its defensive capabilities, but there are calls tonight for Europe to use this as a moment to strengthen its own defences. Here's our military analyst, Sean Bell.
The US Defense Department has announced that 5,000 US personnel will be leaving Germany sometime over the next 6 to 12 months. It is worth putting into context, though, that there'll be at least 36,000 troops currently based in Germany, so this only represents about 14% of the total. The Americans will still have a huge airbase at Ramstein. They'll also have the headquarters for their European and African command. But it is worth looking at the wider footprint here. US forces number about 68,000 total across about 12 countries of Europe. And it's not the first time that President Trump's threatened to reduce the numbers. In his first term, he threatened to reduce them by 10,000. That didn't materialise. So what is the impact of this on NATO security and European security more widely? Well, the NATO military posture around Europe is largely a legacy of the Cold War. During my first tour in the Gütersloh in Germany, when the height of the Cold War, but as soon as that finished, all of a sudden, over the next decade, most of the UK forces withdrew from Germany. So logically, it makes complete sense for the Americans to gradually reduce their footprint in Europe. Of course, that's not the issue. Objectively, it makes sense. Subjectively, the way that this has been delivered is incredibly damaging. It seems to be in response, direct response to German political criticism of President Trump, and therefore a form of punishment, all of which is very damaging for NATO's unity and credibility. Also, the talks between Iran and America do not seem to be going well. At their heart is the nuclear question. President Trump has been very clear that he will not allow Iran to get a nuclear weapon. And if negotiations do fail, his only other alternative is to revert back to military action. You'll remember here at Fordow in the north of the country is one of the nuclear facilities, but it's not the above ground that matters. It's the sensitive facilities that are stored deep underground. In the middle of last year, there was Operation Midnight Hammer. It was B-2 bombers using 20,000 pounds bunker buster bombs going deep underground. This is satellite imagery of how the strikes were intended. And when as a former weapons instructor, it's pretty clear these were a very effective targeting. But did the battle damage assessment assess that actually they destroyed their targets? Over the last 2 or 3 weeks, almost certainly American and Israeli intelligence would have been trying to look and see how many of these nuclear targets were completely destroyed, partially destroyed, or at least were untouched. That will create a new set of targets, a master target list, potentially for an Operation Midnight Hammer 2, and that might be why hypersonic missiles have also been suggested. But what will America do then? Well, the lion's share of opinion still seems to be they'll walk away, but it'll leave behind a lot of loose ends.
So that's the big question. When the war will come to an end, how it will come to an end. Donald Trump actually saying that hostilities have been terminated because there's been a ceasefire since the beginning of April. But when is a war not a war? It's clearly not over.
It's clearly not over. And I feel like we've heard him say things like this before. He absolutely had no idea what he was getting himself into. I'm not sure he's got a clue how to get himself out of it. And as has been proven, every time he says there's been a victory or anytime something that he sees as significant happens, the Iranian regime carries on. And actually life is really awful for people in Iran. He thought they were all going to come out and help and overturn and celebrate, and we've just not seen that at all. So I don't think the end game is anywhere in sight, sadly.
Yeah, Nathaniel, the president, despite him saying that the hostilities have been terminated, we know that reports that strikes are imminent because, you know, he said, I think on Friday, we make a deal or blast them to hell. We'd prefer not to, but that's definitely in the running.
Yeah, look, the deadlines for this have come and gone. Trump makes a number of threats. I think there's a growing perception of taco. Trump always chickens out. That's what a lot of people say now. When it comes to this, I don't think there's, frankly, that much we can do, either in terms of predicting or influencing what Trump is doing. You know, Trump has his own agenda. He will talk about America first, and he will talk about peace through strength. But Trump has his own agenda. There's very little we can do in terms of determining what he will do. But when it comes to the UK, I think we should be looking at our own defence arrangements. We should be looking at the defence investment plan. So Starmer promised that by autumn of last year. 6 months on, it's nowhere to be seen. The investment plan will set out what the priorities are, where the money's coming from, what it's going to, that kind of thing. It's really important for officials. It's really important for firms, whether they're in the supply chain or doing defence financing. But that is what we need to do. We need to sort of get our own house in order, and then we can sort of worry about what Trump's up to.
And Nancy, seemingly Europe has woken up to that fact that you know, the US isn't going to be there to protect them necessarily as they had done in the past. When we see the troops, the 5,000 troops withdrawn from Germany because the Chancellor said something that the US President didn't like, their protection is very, very, very thin, isn't it?
It's very thin. And I think when we talk about Trump's agenda, I think the problem is he hasn't actually got an agenda because he changes from one thing to the other, which is why he's impossible to predict. But I think, yeah, 5,000 American soldiers out of Germany, there will still be lots of American soldiers in Germany, but we just can't rely on them because we don't know what's coming next. Because if a slip of the tongue can remove 5,000 soldiers, where are we at? So you're absolutely right. We can only rely on ourselves and our allies who are perhaps more solid and more predictable going forward.
Right, and there's a NATO summit coming up in June. There was a summit last year in July, I think, but this year it's in June, and that, I think, would be a really important moment for the UK. That will be a moment for Trump to meet not only a number of European leaders, but also, you know, our Prime Minister Starmer. I think that's the time where, or that's the deadline at the very latest, I think, by which we should be looking to spell out our defence investment plans and things like that. But one thing that I think is driving Trump's behaviour and announcements like this is actually domestic politics, because a lot of what Trump does, a lot of what is in Republican minds is driven by domestic politics. They're looking at the midterms. So in November, the states have midterms, I think 35 seats in the Senate, 400 and maybe 35 in the House, something like that. And the Republicans currently control both the Senate and the House, but it looks like if things go as they are, then the Republicans are on course to lose the House and hold on to the Senate just very narrowly. So I think we'll see a lot more from Trump in terms of trying to project strength, in terms of trying to project victories and wins. We'll see him doing a lot in order to influence that domestic political picture.
He's kind of backed himself into a corner, though, hasn't it? Because he was elected on the basis of we don't want to be involved in what foreign countries are doing, and yet here they are coming up to elections with an international crisis that is impacting on our lives with the price of fuel, all the predicted problems that are going to come financially in our pockets. But it's the same in America, and we know how they love their cars, and we know how the price of fuel is massively important to him. So it will be interesting how he gets out of it, because he said he won't do something, he's done it, and now he's facing an election.
Yes, he did promise no more forever wars, didn't he? And suggested that Kamala Harris would take the world into World War III if she were to be voted in. Let's have a look at the King's visit now. He's left Bermuda at the end of a two-day visit on his way home from the United States. Charles was shown slavery artefacts as he faced questions about the UK's colonial past. Our royal correspondent Laura Bundock reports now from Bermuda.
Bermuda has been shaped by slavery, its story woven into the traditional Gombe dance.
They stripped us from our names, they stripped us from our language, but they couldn't strip us from our culture. Why? Because that's from within. Today, you can see hundreds of years later, that culture is still thriving, not surviving, thriving.
The King was shown a small but dark display of slavery. His ancestors prolifically profited from it. It is a difficult and indelible chapter of the British monarchy.
History is complex, and I think the King understands the complexity of the history, and that was conveyed inside. Yeah.
This visit has taken in much of modern Bermuda, its culture, diversity and sun-drenched beauty.
It's such a historical moment, and I get to share it with my two wonderful children.
Definitely been excited. Hoping to get a handshake with him.
It's so nice to know that he's coming to see everything that we love about this place.
Bermuda is an associate member of CARICOM.
But for some here, there is a hope the royal visit prompts deeper conversations about the role and relevance of the monarchy here today.
I think momentarily it has, persons have brought it up that maybe this is a great opportunity to remind the King about its heritage and its return of, when you talk about the 10-point plan of CARICOM, that's part of the reparations movement, to return what was taken.
At a garden party with the governor, words from the king to his territory.
I need hardly say that Bermuda, like all the overseas territories, is a most cherished and important member of the British family, with a friendship as solid as this so-called rock.
A lot has changed since the king last visited in 1970. Bermuda had a referendum on removing links with the royal family, which it rejected in 1995. But the idea never went away, and certainly for some, the king's visit is restarting the discussion. Discussions about Bermuda's colonial past and what it means for the present and future. Laura Bundock, Sky News in Bermuda.
So the king, very successful visit, we know, in the United States. He pulled off a blinder, as many were saying, with his address to Congress. Then moved on to Bermuda, where also the crowds were out on the streets wanting to see him, wanting to press the flesh and shake his hand. But the questions about the colonial legacy, those were raised. In terms of the royal family, what's your view, first of all, Nancy, on whether they should apologise for slavery and whether reparations should be part of the agenda?
I think it's a really important issue that they need to debate. We know the background, we know the generations that it goes back, particularly through their family. And I think actually it is really, really important that if they want, they're still the head of, they're still the leaders in a country that is so far away, and we know how that was done. We know why he's the king there, and none of it is pleasant. So I think actually he needs to have the discussions. I think it needs to be a wider debate beyond what we just discussed here in England. I think it's really important that the countries that are still part of the Commonwealth, that are still impacted, have their views, which are probably far more important than ours. But I can't see this country anytime soon believing that we should be paying reparations.
Bermuda is actually an overseas dependent territory. What's your view, Nathaniel?
I think a lot of these stories look at the past and focus on the past, and no doubt there is a lot of hurt there. But for me, I think it's more powerful, I think it's more impactful to focus on the future, to look at what we can do now, to look at how we can build a society, a country, an economy, a world where hard work is rewarded, where people are treated fairly, where equality is important. Like, I prefer to I think it's more important, but I think it's fair to look at how we can design our world better, how we can make improvements for people now, today, rather than looking at what's happened in the past.
But reparations would be about today. Do you disagree that that would be something that projects to the future but makes recompense for the past?
I think you would find it virtually impossible to unpick exactly what has happened to who and determine exactly how much who should get for what. I think you get into a very messy place when you're trying to determine these things that happened hundreds of years ago. I don't think reparations are really the way forward. I just think it's about, building a world that works for us now.
I don't think it is difficult to unpick, because the slave owners were paid when the slaves were freed. It's actually all documented. We know how much money the white people got. We can actually unpick it. And in places like Jamaica, the poverty is absolutely huge. So it would be about going forward. And I think it needs to say something difficult doesn't necessarily mean that we shouldn't look at it and debate it. I think that makes it more important. So
in a case where, for instance, we have many of them, where people have sold their fellow countrymen into slavery, where do the reparations go? Do they go to the country? Do they go to trying to trace the dependents of someone who was sold into slavery?
But that isn't the question that we're talking about, are we? We're talking about the UK's colonial past and the reparations that would be paid from, families here or from the royal family, perhaps. We're not talking about other types of enslavement.
But why would we stop here? Why would we only talk about this type of slavery and not other slavery? There's, if we go back a few hundred years, there were all different kinds of slavery around the world. The transatlantic slave trade, while horrible, was not the only slave trade there was. So why should we limit it to the transatlantic slave trade?
Because we're in the UK.
Because
we're talking about the UK, and we're talking about the royal family and the king's visit to Bermuda.
But if that logic lands for transatlantic slavery, then it applies to all other kinds of slavery too. So I think you just get into a messy place where you're trying to unpick things that you can't really do with any accuracy. I don't think it gets you anywhere. I think you have to focus on how you can make things work for people now. I don't think you can sort of unpick those kind of things, particularly when there's a lot of a domestic play out within countries that slaves were bought from.
So what are we doing to make things work now for the countries where we are still the head of state? Well, that's the problem, isn't it? We're actually not. So I'm not saying that reparation is the answer, but actually you're absolutely right. We should be helping those countries if we want to still be the head of state, if we want them to be part of the Commonwealth, and we're proud of them at certain points, but we should absolutely be involved and be helping them. I think it's just that we're not.
But I think we do a lot in terms of not just trade, but also aid with a lot of the Commonwealth countries. But when I said I think we should sort of focus on what we can do now, I think a lot of that is about getting the right policies in place by creating an environment where people can go to work, by creating an environment where you attract investment, you attract economic growth. These are the kinds of things that you do that make societies richer. I think trying to unpick things from the past doesn't really get you anywhere. And I think it's important to note the UK has paid a high price for a lot of that. In 2015, actually, is only when we finished paying off the debt that the UK incurred when we paid to free slaves. That was only paid off in 2015.
Who did we pay it to?
The money was paid to the slave owners. That money was paid to the slave owners. So you had the descendants of slaves actually paying the taxes, well, in their taxes, paying for those who kept their descendants as slaves. That's where the money went to.
Right, but...
And that's where it came from.
But in order to undo that, you'd then have to pick out exactly who the money was paid to for various bits of slavery. How far up the slavery supply chain do you go? I just don't think it's as simple as we're making it out.
Nobody deemed it too complicated to pay the slave owners for ending slavery. I just think we're looking at it the wrong way around.
It's a very good point. But we must leave it there. This debate could go on. We're going to take a break. Coming up next, we'll take a first look at what's making the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers. Do stay with us if you can.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?
Perfect. Let's bring you some breaking news.
Being a Sky News presenter.
I began by asking,
thank you so much,
trusting us to tell her story.
The battle for number 10. Sky News has been given exclusive access.
Let me give you a sneak peek. It was the day those present would never forget. Why did you decide to open up and tell your story?
You are watching The Wrap. Nancy and Nathaniel still with me. Time now to see what's making the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers. The Telegraph claims to have been told that Starmer loyalists on Labour's ruling body are no longer prepared to block Andy Burnham's return to Parliament. The Times reveals that Prince William pays up to £7 million in income tax a year. The figure puts the heir to the throne in the top 0.002% of taxpayers in the UK. The Express leads with claims that King Charles was determined to make his royal visit to the United States, despite political concerns to help repair the special relationship. The King's visit also makes the front of the Sunday People, which describes his trips to both the US and Bermuda as victory for the United Kingdom. The Observer's front features a look back at the life of David Attenborough as his 100th birthday approaches, as well as comments from the Prime Minister on political division within the country. We'll have more on that shortly. The Sun reports that Britain's Got Talent judge and internet star KSI has sparked fury after making a joke about hitting any woman he got pregnant. Cloak and Jagger, says the Star, as Jerry Hall is announced as the headline signing of the next series of Celebrity Traitors. Now, before we get to the rest of the papers, Keir Starmer has written in tomorrow's Observer. Our political correspondent Lucy McDade joins us now from Westminster. Lucy, are you there? Yes, right on cue. What has the Prime Minister had to say?
Yeah, good evening. Well, I think this is the Prime Minister staging a bit of a fight back. Over the past few days, today, we've seen a whole spread of speculation in pretty much every single newspaper, lining up potential leadership challenges to the Prime Minister. We are heading into local election week, and we are seeing some figures, names that we've seen come up in Westminster a number of times, potentially getting their ducks in a row, if you like, to launch a leadership challenge to Keir Starmer. Andy Burnham, one of them, the Mayor of Greater Manchester. The Guardian reporting, and you just mentioned there, the Telegraph front page tomorrow, making it very clear that he is reportedly planning a quick comeback to Westminster and may or may not be blocked by Labour's ruling executive committee this time round. The Telegraph also today, in fact, reporting that the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, he may now have the backing of more than 80 Labour MPs. Now, that is the minimum number needed to launch a leadership challenge against the Prime Minister. Wes Streeting in public, his team very much downplaying any of this speculation, saying he fully backs the Prime Minister. But look, these conversations have been happening in Westminster for months, and many MPs, in conversations I've had, have been using next week's elections as a bit of a deadline for Keir Starmer to prove that he can lead the party into the next election. So I think his fate will be decided after next week. But the Prime Minister, writing on Substack online, but also in The Observer tomorrow, pretty much making the case for stability of leadership. And a warning to his MPs that unity is what's needed if they want to deliver their plan for change. Let's just listen to what he said, or read what he said. When the nation rallied together to deal with COVID, the last government, he says, could have channeled that spirit to build a better nation. But instead, they descended into political infighting and let the country slump back to the old status quo. He says, not this time. So there, quite a clear message to those potential leadership candidates, warning them not to be getting involved in this type of speculation. He also talks about things we've heard before from this Prime Minister, his need, his desire even to get closer to the European Union, to build on defence spending. He does say that we will get that highly anticipated defence investment plan in the next few weeks. So what Keir Starmer is trying to do is look ahead, look past what may happen in local elections next week, putting the case forward for him to be the Prime Minister that leads the party into the next election. This is a message not just to voters, but to his own MPs. He's telling them, you may well be talking about my future, but I'm having no intention of going anywhere.
Yes, he has said that before. Lucy, thank you very much for the moment. And we do know, don't we, Nancy, that the Prime Minister is very much intent on staying in his position, he says he's not going anywhere.
But aren't they always, until somebody finally stabs them in the back and they disappear? I think the message we're getting in the local elections, so particularly where our newspapers are in South Yorkshire, is the local councillors, those who are hoping to be elected or re-elected, want nothing to do with Keir Starmer. His face is not on any of the leaflets. He is just not mentioned. And I think his days are done. I think it's only a matter of time until somebody steps up and ousts him.
We are reading in the papers that several of his colleagues are on manoeuvres. Andy Burnham, who we thought was out of the frame, seemingly has more than the 80 number of MPs that he would need to back him for a challenge. Angela Rayner, Wes Streeting also has 80 plus. But also the other thing that's coming through is the preference is for him to stand aside rather than face a leadership challenge. Do you think that will ever be the case? Can you see any scenario where he steps aside?
I think we've seen a shift in politics more broadly, particularly in the wake of generally since Theresa May, actually, we've seen a move in politics from formal votes of no confidence and prime ministers resigning when they lose to a more gentle backroom approach. So if you look at the way that Liz Truss left office, for instance, the cabinet ministers went to see her and tell her, look, your time is up. You can sort of leave with whatever dignity you have left, or we can force you out the door. You saw the same thing with Boris Johnson, where he actually managed to win his vote of confidence, but then the cabinet went to see him one by one and said, it might be time for you to move on. So we see generally now that leaders tend to go via the softer backroom approach rather than formally losing their votes. But when it comes to this, I think it's no surprise we see a lot of this speculation now because of the local elections next week. The locals on Thursday are Starmer's first big test in office. There were locals last year in about 1,600 seats. So the general election in 24, locals last year 1,600, but now we're up to 5,000. So it's a much bigger test of how the country sees the Labour Party. I don't think the result will be very positive, and that, I think, is driving a lot of the speculation about Angela Rayner, Wes Streeting, Andy Burnham.
Nancy, do you think he will survive after the local elections? That's been predicted to be the point at which, you know, the knives will come out. But do you think he'll stagger on? I
think he will stagger on for a little while longer. But I think it's interesting, isn't it, actually? You list all the Conservatives who went because of their behaviour, because of things they did, because the rules were broken, because they were the same old, why are we bothering to vote? All this nonsense that people don't believe in politics and our politicians now, and there we go, first Labour Prime Minister, just add him to the list. It's actually really upsetting that we haven't had true leaders who are able to step up. He said he would be different, he said he would bring change, and no matter what the changes in policies, the discussion has been about they're not different. And I think this is a real problem. This is why the door's wide open for reform, because Nigel Farage can come into places like Barnsley and say, we're different, and there's actually no evidence that they're not different at the minute. Obviously, if they get power, we've seen in other places like Doncaster that it becomes a disaster and chaos and there's lots of infighting. But right now, Labour's looking absolutely no different from those that they said they would.
But that chaos, I think, we see at the top of the Labour Party, at the top of the government. Look, the Prime Minister sacked his Chief of Staff earlier this year. Before that, he sacked Sue Gray, his former Chief of Staff. He's gone through 2 Chiefs of Staff. He's had to sack Angela Rayner over her tax affairs. He's gone through a number of cabinet secretaries. I think it's 11 ministers maybe over his time. So there's been a lot of churn. There's been a lot of chaos at the top of the government. I think that's what is driving the speculation. That's what has led to people feeling like Labour aren't quite delivering for them. I think we enter a real period of jeopardy whereby if Labour would like to have a leadership contest, then it makes sense. A natural window for a contest would be over the early parts of the summer because Parliament is in recess then, and so you can sort of have a contest that wraps up by the time MPs return to Westminster in September, and then you have a new leader and cabinet in place by the time you have a full Labour conference at the end of September at early October. But look, the thing that I would warn about these candidates is that they all come with their own difficulties. So if we start with Wes Streeting, he's reported closeness to Mandelson. He is also fighting a marginal seat, so he's in Ilford North. He has a narrow majority. Labour MPs are concerned that if you elect him as leader, he might then lose his seat at the next election. Is that really the direction you want to go? Angela Rayner, we all know her tax difficulties. She hopes that those will be wrapped up soon, but as things stand, she is still not clear of those. There are a few others that are around. Andy Burnham is one of them, but he has a more difficult path because Andy Burnham is not currently an MP. And so it would take the Labour's National Executive to let him in. We read a bit about that today, but actually there are NEC elections in the summer which will further likely tilt the direction in Burnham's favour. But then you might have a mayoral election in Manchester. So there are knock-on effects. There are difficulties with all of these candidates. None of them has a clear rule to the top.
Indeed. Reported yesterday that Andy Burnham had a suggested replacement for him as mayor of Greater Manchester, so he even has his replacement lined up to ease his path. So we've had a look at all of the politics. Let's move to something completely different, something you're very keen to talk about, I know, Nancy, and that is celebrity traitors. We have the lineup for the next series. We have front page of the Star.
We do. We have the lineup, and it's a good lineup. I must say, I think this is the escapism that the country needs. It was hugely popular. Millions tuned in a way that you don't often see with TV these days. And it's a good lineup. I feel like often you watch things like I'm Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, and you have to Google who a few people are, but there are some really big names going into here. If you look at the front of the Sun, you've got Maya Jama, I mean, you've got Ross Kemp, you've got comedians who are always brilliant on there. I think, I mean, it's Jerry Hall. I think people are hoping that there might be a few rock and roll secrets slip out of her list. But I think it's just fun. The news agenda is so difficult and so hard. Politics and war. And I think actually this just lifts. It's like Sherlock Holmes for 2026, isn't it?
Yeah, and the Star promising some cloak and Jagger. See what we did there with their headline. We must leave it there. We have run out of time. Nathaniel and Nancy, thank you very much for the moment. Coming up, how Arsenal up the stakes in the race for the Premier League title.
A lifeline for millions of people living on both sides of one of the most volatile international borders.
It's dams like these that have become inflection points between the two nuclear-armed neighbours, which could potentially lead to water wars in the future. A terror attack has shattered the peace and tranquility of Kashmir. At least 26 people have been killed and as many injured when militants fired upon them. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
The old and young, all weary after being trapped for days as the worst floods have hit Kerala in a century.
3 days we are on a rooftop. They have no food, nothing.
The roads have been inundated. The only way out is to get people by boat. There have been reported deaths and many injuries, several critical.
Many families will grapple with the unimaginable loss of one of the worst disasters in India's aviation history.
The spiraling violence between two nuclear-armed neighbours that harbour decades of hostility just seems to be getting worse by the day.
Garbage dumps like this not only threaten the lives of millions of people, but also pose a deadly consequence on the environment and climate.
It is a source of death, decay, disease and pollution for hundreds of thousands of people living in its shadows.
There is so much disease because of this garbage. Sometimes it's so difficult to just breathe.
Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Over the next 45 days, an estimate 400 million Hindu pilgrims are expected to converge here in Prayagraj on the banks of the holy river Ganga and Yamuna. It's a real kaleidoscope of people from all walks of life.
The cameras are poised here, there, everywhere.
The day those present would never forget.
First question, Sky News.
Do you hate the thought of losing to him?
I hate the thought of losing to anyone.
Historic day here today. They are pushing forward.
They dashed to the water.
Wait, what country are you
from? The UK.
Why don't you go back to your country?
Huge questions to be grappled with.
That is totally unprecedented. Been quite some day.
Let me start with breaking news.
I urge you not to look away. If Hamas hands the hostages over, they will end this conflict.
The world has been watching. Good to see you again. How are you?
Did she say how he was?
The conditions are awful.
The jets were ordered to come back. Historic day here today.
How will you respond if India does launch airstrikes?
They'll be allowed to war.
But I'm just going to put some body armour on. I'm Yalda Hakim.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist... Hi, darling.
Beth Rigby, Sky News.
...is being a Sky News journalist. You said to people, I'm not coming back for more, but you have come back for more. Well, let's kick off and make a statement. What can our Prime Minister say to you to not impose tariffs? He's coming out! What more do you need?
Time now to catch up on all of the day's latest sports news with Josh.
In 2020, Jude Bellingham's move to Borussia Dortmund caught the eye. £25 million for a player who'd only ever played in the Championship. But there's now a wider trend of players outside the Premier League getting moves to Europe's top 4 divisions. So what's behind that?
We look at Championship, we look at League One, we look at League Two. So it's a market we look at a lot, but we are being very realistic at the same time. If you are looking to play very good football, great atmosphere into the stadium, in a very competitive league, and maybe look, to make a step further somewhere when you leave Toulouse, and then allow money, then you should consider us.
It's a different type of football out here. It's like in England, it's very intense and physical, and I feel like here, it's tactically, they've more focus on the tactics and the technical side of things, so you have to be more composed on the ball and figure out patterns of play, and it's good for my football brain.
Not many players get the chance to go from League One to the Bundesliga, so I thought I'd take that jump abroad and see how things go.
When I came, we worked a lot on my defensive shape, my positioning, small details and stuff like that, and I feel like I'm a different player from when I first stepped into this building.
It's not just the top 4 leagues where British and Irish players are settling. There's opportunities across Europe, across all the leagues, and the chance to play for massive clubs.
Sancho was the first real big name to take that step as well. And obviously me going to Excelsior is not as big as going to Dortmund, but it's kind of the same thing in terms of moving away from home, building a name for yourself outside of England. Loads of young English players started to do it. I think that was the first time from what I knew of anyway. And yeah, it kind of became a trend.
When I went to Greece, especially like playing in front of fans that are like crazy, it changes the whole atmosphere of the game. I've had different types of managers, Italian managers, Dutch managers that want to play different types of football, so I've had to adjust to that as well. When you go to play in Europe, you open yourself to a whole nother market now. Playing in the Conference League, Champions League, Europa League, I'm glad to say that I've done that, Definitely something I'll look back at and think, wow, I'm grateful for doing that, and I'm glad I took that risk to go and play in Europe.
I made the move wanting to improve myself as a player, go and experience something else. Like I said, a great club like Anderlecht, I can't speak highly enough of the people there, the professionalism of the club, everything like that. And also had in mind that could be a stepping stone to me being able to go there, do well, and obviously come back and try and achieve what I wanted to do, to play in the Premier League regularly.
For teams in England, foreign moves offer good opportunities for loans and different development pathways.
For a footballer, each footballer's their path and their careers could take them to different places at any time. I enjoyed it a lot. You can have like the professional side and on the football pitch and at the training ground, and seeing and learning how a different sort of culture plays the game, but also like just as a person, as a human being, the experience to go abroad and live in a different place, live in and embrace different culture. Personally, like, I have regrets. I wish when I was there I learnt the language.
I played a lot at the start and then kind of came out the team through the middle, but
Yeah, I played, managed to play in the Europa League with them as well, so that was a new experience for me. But no, I think overall it was, when I look back on it, it was, especially the way it ended when we finished, I think it was in the top 4 on the last day of the season. Yeah, it was an incredible experience.
And it's not just on loan that young players are making the move, it's a trend we're seeing more and more. Angel Gomez was just 19 when he decided to leave Manchester United to join Lille. So what was behind that decision?
Based on the competition of the Premier League, it's the biggest league in the world, and it's the league that has the most money. So I think for younger players,
Weather now, it was good, not so good now.
You're looking happy.
Well, the forecast looks good.
So you've sorted the travel insurance then?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors Sky News Weather.
Well, it will be cooler and unsettled through Bank Holiday Monday, but expect some dry and sunny interludes too. There'll be a mostly mild, rather cloudy start tomorrow. Many places will be dry, but Northern England and the far south of Scotland can expect some mainly light rain. Northern Ireland, the east of Ireland and southwestern Britain will see a few showers. Sunday morning will stay quite cloudy. Central Britain will see the early rain largely fading, leaving much of Britain dry, but the southwest will see showers developing more widely. Elsewhere, the bulk of Scotland looks dry, while Ireland and Northern Ireland will have sunny spells.
All Clear Travel Insurance proudly sponsors Sky News Weather.